So I began to wonder, how do young Muslim Americans manage their identities in this context? How do they see being American and being Muslim at the same time? What kind of cognitive and symbolic work must they do to balance it all out? And because adolescence and early adulthood are understood as a time in life when people grapple with their identities, I decided I wanted to conduct a study of young American Muslims. So, indeed, recent sociological studies conducted across the nation have found that among second-generation youth, and these studies are never done with Arabs or Muslims, but they're done with Latinos and Asians and Black Caribbeans and Black Africans. And these studies show that a significant proportion of these youth switch their identities in their mid-teens from a hyphenated American identity to a national identity rooted in their parents' homeland. In other words, you know, if you interview them when they're 12, they say, I'm Mexican-American, or I'm Vietnamese-American, or I'm Nigerian-American, and by the time they reach 16, they've dropped the American. This is across all of these groups that are racialized in this country. This change, which includes a rejection of American identity, is explained as a response to racism and discrimination. As Fortes and Rumbaut say, they're the authors of major books on this research, quote, groups subjected to extreme discrimination and derogation of their national origins are likely to embrace them ever more fiercely. So you're subjected to discrimination, you're going to embrace that identity more strongly. So how will these youth that they're talking about develop a healthy sense of being American while feeling rejected? This is where scholars Fortes and Zhao have their segmented assimilation theory. My students know this theory. We talked about it in my immigrants class. And so what Fortes and Zhao say is that it really depends on the resources these youth have available to them, but to many of these youth actually will take the path of gangs, drugs, criminality, and downward mobility. And as doing so, they will say, I'm American, because those things are seen as very American. Gangs and drugs and these kinds of things. So that's the path that kids who are forced to reject their identity get pushed on, unless they have other resources to combat that, which I will get back to. So my idea for this study emerged after the murders at Fort Hood in November of 2009, so that was a year ago, by an Arab American Muslim. He was a career military professional. Some argued at the time that Nidal Hassan is the name of the person who's on trial now, that Nidal Hassan had an identity conflict and that his loyalties were split between being American and being Muslim. And that the murders show that he took the Muslim identity, that is, because the murders are violent, Muslims are violent, you see how the logic works, right? So, I mean, I have my own theories on Nidal Hassan, and they're very personal and individual, and have nothing to do with whether he was an Arab or a Muslim or whatever, but we can talk about that if you want. But I was being called by the media about this topic, and I realized, we really have no specific data with which to address this conflicting identities charge. I know many, many, many American Muslims, and I know Nidal Hassan is an exception. He's an outlier. And crime statistics can prove to you that Nidal Hassan is an exception, that he's an outlier. But, can we say more than that? Do we have deeper things to say? Can we address how American Muslims manage their identities? So this is what first compelled me to want to do this study I'm embarking on. Okay, so the study of... this study I'm doing on managing Muslim identities is designed as a transnational study. So I plan to study American Muslims in the United States, and to begin with, in Palestine, Jordan, and Yemen. And hopefully I'll be able to get more grants and make this a much broader study in Pakistan or India or Somalia. Well, Somalia not now. Anyhow, Bosnia. Anyhow, I have a big vision, but right now I'm just starting. Now, there's 4 reasons I want to do this study transnationally, because people often say to me, why are you studying Americans in Palestine? Palestine's full of Americans. Jordan's full of Americans. Yemen is full of Americans. And so if you go to those places and you know them, you know there's a lot of Americans over there, right? And the American Muslim kids, especially those who are children of immigrants, are really a highly transnational population because it's very common for their parents, if they have the money and they have the legal papers to come and go, to send or take their kids over to their home countries during their teenage years to expose them to their homeland culture, right? It's a very common practice. In fact, it's so common that in Palestine and in Jordan and in Yemen, there are a whole range of private schools that are bilingual that are just for these kids. They teach in English, and then they try to teach these kids some Arabic in the process. So referring back to this theory of segmented assimilation, I'm wondering, are these trips to the homeland actually some of the resources these kids can grab onto to affirm their own dignity? And I'll come back to that at the end. And to resist the pull of crime and drugs and gangs and downward mobility. So in adding a kind of degree of complexity to this, these youth tell me they poignantly experience social exclusion in the United States. And to cope with this, they do heighten another identity. So, for example, with my RIN research this summer, which I did in Chicago, talking with 21 Arab American Muslim youth, I found that a third of them, more than a third, said their first identity was Muslim. 20% said their first identity was Arab. And the remaining gave a range of identities: Palestinian, Muslim Palestinian, Arab Muslim, myself, woman, they had all sorts of things. But when these kids these youth, go to their parents' home countries for high school, they find out that everybody there sees them as American. So it's really kind of funny. And the reason they see them that way is, to put it bluntly, because they're seen as somewhat spoiled American. The way they act, the way they like, whatever. Their demeanor is American. And there's this, my entire career I've always heard this thing that why do they hate us? Over there they hate Americans. I mean, that's just not true. So, first of all, it's full of Americans. Secondly, yes, people don't like American government policies, but it doesn't mean they hate Americans. So there's no hate for these kids because they're American. It's just that they're kind of a little bit snobby, and I don't know if any of you have been through this experience. You might talk about that. So now here, this identity that these youth, they face discrimination in the United States. They say, oh, I'm a Muslim, I'm an Arab, and then they go over to their parents' homeland, and they're like, no, you're American, you're American. And so I'm just really interested in, how they deal with these challenges to who they are, right? These are these very formative periods of deciding who they are. So what happens next? And I also want to study, variation, like how do different American Muslim youth understand these things differently, because not everybody's going to understand it the same way. And does it matter if you're a male or a female? Do they have different ways of negotiating these identities? And does it matter if you're in Chicago or Ramallah or Amman or Sana'a in Yemen? Or is it all the same there? I think this is very fascinating, how the place in which you live informs how you see yourself, right? So to do all this, I'm heading off from January to July. I will be gone. I must thank the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences for giving me a course reduction and letting me go do my research, and the RIN research grant for letting me do the research this summer, and then I got a grant from the Council of American Overseas Research Centers to do this study. So now why did I select these three countries? Well, number one, they're all Arab countries. I mean, I speak Arabic. I have trust. I can leverage, some kind of legitimacy in these countries because people know me. And doing this kind of research anywhere, if people don't trust you, you're not going to get undated, right? So I'm just leveraging the resources that I have personally I picked Palestine, Jordan, and Yemen because those are among the highest contributors to Arab immigrants in this country. So that's why I picked those 3 countries. Okay, another reason I want to do a transnational study is to show variation, to counteract the stereotype that all Muslims are the same. And the third reason I want to do a transnational study is to test kind of an untested assumption of segmented assimilation theory. So segmented assimilation theory assumes that youth form their identities based on, what's in their direct day-to-day experience, right? Their neighborhood, their schools, the media. But I really think times have changed, and we have a global marketplace of identities now, and with the internet and all that, that you can figure out who you are from a much broader arena than your neighborhood. And so I think we have to think differently about everyone now, but about youth and formation of identities. And my colleague Jim Holstein has written some important books on this in this topic, and he says, in a postmodern context, identity is being constructed in more settings than other. So I want to follow up on this cue. And what may contribute to one's identity, it may be a virtual community, right? It may be a community in which you've never met personally the other people. So there's some theory expansion. And the fourth reason I want to do a transnational study is because I want to explore, the notion of global identity. In the United States, in the literature on immigrants here, we talk about pan-ethnic identities like Latino and Asian American, when these are grouping all sorts of people together from all sorts of countries that don't probably see themselves as the same, right? We have these categories. So pan-ethnicity is understood as a particularly American social construction. Okay, so this next sentence does not make it out of context, but so the theory would say that American Muslims, given the way they're treated, would have this Muslim identity would be a very salient identity, and so I'm curious: is Muslim a religious identity, a racial identity, a global identity? I mean, what kind of identity is it? I don't know the answer to that. So that's another thing I would like to find out. So that's kind of the summary of the research I'm planning to do. You might ask what this all has to do with peacemaking, since I got the written summer research grant. Well, my goal is not only to produce social science research of high integrity, but to produce the material for intelligent discourses on Muslim American youth that stress variation, diversity, and anytime you talk about people being different, you destroy stereotypes, right? And destroying stereotypes is an act of peacemaking, because stereotypes produce hatred and violence. Skip the next section, and I just want to end this talk by summarizing some of the findings from the data collection I did this past summer. It was interesting. I asked these youth, what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be Muslim? What does it mean to be Arab? What is an American? What is an Arab? What is a Muslim? And it was very interesting. To me, it was very interesting what I found. To them, so these are the common patterns, because there's variation. To them, American was a legal, cultural, and racial identity. Legal, if you're born in the United States, you're American. Cultural, well, the process of living in the United States, you learn these values about freedom and rights and opportunities. But they also understood that American was a racial category. And they said things like, everyone knows that Americans are white. I am never understood by others to be American. It is for whites. Another one said to me, well, I'm always asked, where are you from? These are kids born born in the United States, but they're always asked, where are you from? Which is symbolically means you can't be American.